Steve, throughout your career, you were known predominantly as a power pitcher, relying on the fastball, curveball, and slider. I think most people feel as though that overpowering slider is really what made you the dominant pitcher you were during the 70s and 80s.
I always had great control with my fastball. I always worked the corners very well, and my slider would come out the same slot as my fastball. And it would give the appearance, because the spin was so tight, of the fastball until at the end when it would dive out of the strike zone. I get a lot of check swing.
Pete Rose said it plain. He was a beast. And when Pete Rose, the greatest contact hitter who ever lived, the man who squeezed out more hits than anyone in baseball history by a wide margin, says that about a pitcher, everything stops. You listen. Rose scratched and clawed for every hit across 24 brutal years. He trusted his eyes more than any batter who ever played the game. But Steve Carlton broke those eyes. He made Pete Rose, of all people, feel completely helpless at the plate. And Rose was not alone. 9 of the greatest hitters who ever played the game each tried to find the right words for that feeling. 9 Hall of Famers, 9 different stories, and every single one of them arrives at the same uncomfortable place. How did one quiet lefty make the best hitters alive feel like they never had a chance at all? Before we go any further, if this video is hitting the right notes, go ahead and use the hype feature and give it some hype right now. It only takes a second, and it means more than you know. Now let us get into it, because the answer is not a simple one. What Steve Carlton built was something with 3 separate layers all working together at exactly the same time. His slider, his body, his silence. Each one of those 3 things alone would have made him dangerous. All 3 combined made him something the game had never quite seen before and has not seen since. A pitcher who won not just with his arm but with his mind, his muscles, and a carefully constructed psychological campaign that started the moment opposing hitters opened their eyes on the morning they were scheduled to face him. But to truly understand the weight of who Carlton was, you have to go back to 1972, because 1972 is where everything becomes almost impossible to explain to someone who was not there. The Philadelphia Phillies were a complete disaster. There is no kind way to say it. They finished that season with 97 losses. They sat 37.5 games out of first place. They were one of the worst franchises in baseball, a roster that looked like it had no present worth mentioning and a very uncertain future. Fans in Philadelphia had very little to show up for. The organization was in a rebuilding process that was not going well by any measure. In a normal year, a team like that disappears into the back of the standings. You circle their games on your schedule as guaranteed wins and move on without thinking twice. But something happened in Philadelphia that year that nobody in baseball could stop watching. Steve Carlton had just arrived by trade from the St. Louis Cardinals. And the story behind that trade is one of those baseball facts that still makes people stop and blink when they hear it for the first time. The entire thing came down to a contract disagreement over $15,000. That is the number. $15,000 separated the Cardinals from keeping one of the most dominant pitchers on the planet wearing their uniform. They could not close that $15,000 gap. Carlton was gone. Baseball historians call that transaction one of the most lopsided trades in the history of professional sports. Once you see what Carlton did next, that description starts to feel like it does not go far enough to capture what actually happened. He won 27 games that year. His earned run average was 1.97. He struck out 310 hitters. He pitched 346 innings. He finished 30 of his 41 starts as the complete game winner. He led the entire National League in wins, earned run average, strikeouts, innings pitched, and complete games all at the same time. That is the pitcher's triple crown, plus everything attached around the outside of it. He was not just the best in the league. He was operating in a completely separate category from every other pitcher on the leaderboard. Here is the number that puts it all in perspective. The Phillies won 59 games total that entire season. Carlton personally won 27 of them. He accounted for nearly 46% of every single win his team earned across 6 months of baseball. His personal winning percentage was .730. The rest of the Philadelphia pitching staff, every other arm in that organization combined, won at a percentage of .269. Carlton was not carrying the team on his back. Carlton was the only reason that franchise had anything to talk about. Without him, the 1972 Phillies were one of the worst collections of baseball players assembled in the modern era. On his day, they were a team nobody wanted to face. In opposing clubhouses, players gave Carlton's start day a name. They called it Win Day, not as a compliment, as a resignation, as an admission made before the game even began. In a 4-game series against the 1972 Phillies, an opposing team figured they were taking 3 with relative comfort. But on Carlton's day, you were going to lose. The best managers in the game had accepted this fact and built their series strategies around it. The best hitters had accepted it too, and there was genuinely nothing anyone could do to change it. That kind of certainty, that level of dread built into a single day on the schedule, is something almost no pitcher in baseball history has ever manufactured. Carlton manufactured it every 5 days for an entire season against an entire league. Carlton got stronger as games progressed. George Foster, one of the most feared power hitters of his Pitchers era and a cornerstone of the Cincinnati Reds lineup, noticed this specifically and never forgot it. Unlike elite starters who typically saw their stuff fade noticeably after 100 pitches, Carlton appeared to actually gain momentum as innings accumulated. His 30 complete games that season represent a number no pitcher has approached since. Not in the decades that immediately followed. Not in any decade after that. Nobody has come close. It is a number that is aged not as a high bar to chase, but as something from an entirely different world. He even contributed at the plate. He beat Hall of Famer Bob Gibson in a shutout and went 2 for 3 himself at bat in that same game. On August 9th, 1972, he hit a home run while shutting out the Pittsburgh Pirates 2-0. You could not hit him. You could not stop him from scoring runs on his own. The terror was comprehensive and it covered every inch of the field. Carlton's teammates felt the difference too. When Carlton took the mound, the whole team expected to win. Larry Bowa recalled that no matter how difficult things had been, no matter how the club had been playing in the days before, they knew that on Carlton's day, they were likely going to win. He would pitch deep into the game and give up almost nothing. That kind of certainty from a single pitcher is almost impossible to manufacture. Carlton provided it as a matter of routine. Now let us get to the weapon that made all of this possible. The pitch that 9 Hall of Famers still describe as if they are revisiting a long, strange dream that never quite made sense. The pitch that Carlton's longtime catcher Tim McCarver famously called the dime spin, the slider that changed what baseball believed a breaking ball could do. Before Carlton came along, the slider was treated as a second-tier pitch. Something to mix in, a variation without the prestige or effectiveness of a true breaking ball. Most pitchers and coaches considered it a lesser version of the sweeping curveball, a shortcut option that serious pitchers were not supposed to lean on. Carlton took that pitch and turned it into the most feared weapon in baseball by doing something nobody had done before, at that velocity with that kind of movement happening that late in the flight. He threw it over 50% of the time in certain seasons. He built his entire identity around it. And by doing so, he forced hitters to reconsider their entire relationship with the strike zone every single time they faced him. It started in 1968 with a man named Sadaharu Oh. Oh was a Japanese baseball legend and one of the most disciplined and technically precise hitters the game had ever produced. Carlton gave up 2 home runs to him. It burned. He went away thinking about it. If even the most patient and excellently trained hitters in the world could find a way to time his pitches with enough preparation, he needed something that was fundamentally impossible to time. A pitch that would look like one thing for almost its entire journey and become something else at the last possible moment. He began refining a grip that would make that happen with maximum velocity and minimum warning. The result was the dime spin. Picture a coin spinning perfectly flat and tight on a table. Not wobbling, not tilting, just rotating as cleanly and precisely as physics allows. That is the kind of rotation Carlton put on his slider. Completely controlled, extremely fast. And that spin created a break so late and so sharp that it rewrote what hitters believed was humanly possible to track with the human eye. Here is the simple version of how it worked. Carlton threw the ball and it looked like a fastball the entire way to the plate. Same arm speed, same release point, the same trajectory toward the strike zone. A hitter processed every visual cue available in the fraction of a second. The flight allowed and concluded. Fastball. The swing began. Everything the hitter had trained since childhood was engaged and in motion. Then, about 15 to 20 feet from home plate, the ball snapped in a different direction. Not gradually, not in a wide sweeping arc. A hard, sudden, sharp break, and the swing was already committed, already past the point of return. The bat was going to miss the ball, and there was nothing to be done. Carlton applied off-center pressure with his middle finger against the seam and released it like turning a doorknob. The combination of high velocity and precise rotation kept the ball behaving like a fastball for almost the entire flight, and then made it something else right at the moment it mattered most. Pete Rose described it as looking like a strike until the very last microsecond. That was not colorful language. That was a precise description of what Carlton had engineered. A pitch built to deliver incorrect information to the hitter's brain at the exact moment when there was no longer any time to correct it. Carlton threw that slider over 50% of the time in certain seasons. Even knowing it was coming did not help, because it still looked exactly like a fastball on the way. It still snapped at the last fraction of a second. It still required a physical response in less time than any human body can produce one. The gap between knowing and reacting was exactly where Carlton operated, and that gap was wide enough to humiliate 9 Hall of Famers on a regular basis. Now it is time to meet those 9 men. These were not ordinary players. These were the finest hitters of an entire generation, and not a single one of them found a consistent answer for Steve Carlton. Number 9, Mike Schmidt. Mike Schmidt watched Carlton dismantle opposing lineups from 90 feet away at third base for years. He had the best view in the stadium for every pitch, every reaction, every walk back to the dugout. And Schmidt said something that tells you more about Carlton than any single statistic does. He said he was genuinely thankful that he never had to face Steve Carlton in a real competitive game. Not that Carlton Carlton was impressive. Not that he respected Carlton's stuff. Thankful, relieved, the way a person feels when something dangerous passes close by and misses them. That is a profound thing to hear from a Hall of Fame hitter. Schmidt was one of the finest third basemen who ever played. He handled elite pitching his entire career and had the numbers to prove it. And yet watching Carlton take apart lineup after lineup from the infield was enough to make him count himself lucky for wearing the same uniform. He called the slider a nasty piece of business. He described hitters walking back to the dugout not angry, not fired up, but genuinely confused, like a person who reached out for something solid and their hand went right through it. Real confusion about what had happened to them. That confused expression, repeated on the best hitters in the game, was something Schmidt watched up close for years. He was grateful he only ever saw it from the outside. Number 8. Joe Morgan. Joe Morgan was the tactical brain of the Cincinnati Reds. He won back-to-back Most Valuable Player awards and was one of the most patient, disciplined, and intellectually precise hitters the game has ever produced. Against most pitchers, Morgan arrived at the plate with information already gathered. He had studied their body language. He had tracked their emotional tells. He had assembled small advantages from the way a man holds his glove or shifts his weight on the rubber. Against Carlton, there was nothing to gather. No information was available. Carlton showed nothing, said nothing, gave nothing away before, during, or after any at-bat, any inning, or any game. Morgan said the silent approach created a daunting atmosphere in high-pressure moments. You could not find the human target inside the opponent. You could not locate the place where Carlton was vulnerable or nervous or beatable in the way that all humans are somewhere. There was just silence and the slider and nothing else. Morgan hit .264 against Carlton in 127 plate appearances and struck out 13 times. For a man who built his entire game around patience and protecting the strike zone, Carlton forced him into at-bats that were more aggressive and less carefully constructed than his natural game allowed. Even Morgan's best performances against Carlton were subtly different from what he was at his best. Carlton changed the way Morgan had to play, and that alone is a meaningful form of dominance over a hitter of that caliber. Number 7. Dave Winfield. Dave Winfield was a physical force on any baseball field he walked onto. 6'6", powerfully built, a supreme athlete operating in a game already full of elite athletes. The kind of player who shifted the energy in a stadium just by arriving. And yet Carlton's combination of physical presence and total psychological silence produced something that Winfield found genuinely unsettling in a way that he could not easily explain or dismiss. Winfield described feeling not challenged but ignored. Not like Carlton was trying to beat him, like Carlton was doing something entirely different, and Winfield happened to be standing in the space between the mound and the catcher's mitt, like a minor inconvenience in a much larger exercise that Carlton was conducting for his own purposes. Carlton stood 6'4" and moved with the fluid, liquid power that came from years of martial arts training and conditioning work that was ahead of its time. His face showed nothing across 9 innings. His posture gave nothing away. Winfield said that stoic, silent presence added pressure that was just as real as any fastball he faced. Because competing against something that refuses to acknowledge you as a threat removes the frame of reference hitters rely on to feel like an equal in the competition. Carlton had no interest in giving hitters that frame. He was there to execute a task, and you were an obstacle he had already solved before the game began. Number 6. George Foster. George Foster was the feared heart of the Big Red Machine lineup. In 1977, he hit 52 home runs. He was the hitter opposing pitchers thought about when trying to construct a game plan, the bat that changed how entire defenses were aligned. Carlton neutralized him consistently for as long as they faced each other. In 148 plate appearances against Carlton, Foster hit .250 with 36 strikeouts. Sub .250 might look survivable in print, but for George Foster, a man capable of hitting over .300 with elite power production against most of the pitchers in the league, that represented a steady and significant reduction in what he was able to do. And 36 strikeouts in 148 plate appearances reflects a rate far above Foster's normal output against anyone else. The slider was working exactly as designed, making a great hitter see a strike, commit to a swing, and find only empty air. Foster noticed the late inning quality that separated Carlton from every other great pitcher he faced across a long career. Most hitters survive against elite starters by waiting for the velocity to dip just slightly in the 7th or for the slider to hang just a little in the 8th. Those small reductions in sharpness are where great hitters find their moments of opportunity. Against Carlton, that moment never arrived. He got stronger. Every inning delivered the same precision as the one before it. Every at-bat in the 9th carried the same force as the ones in the 1st. There was no waiting him out. The game ended with Carlton still at full power and the hitters still no closer to a solution than they had been 3 hours earlier. Number 5. Rod Carew. Rod Carew won 7 batting titles. He is considered one of the greatest pure hitters who ever lived, a man with bat control so refined that he could guide the ball to nearly any part of the field at will and make adjustments mid-swing that other hitters could not manage even when standing still. He studied pitchers obsessively and adapted in ways that coaches spent entire careers trying to teach. Against Carlton, all of that extraordinary skill ran into something that bent the usual rules of what hitting is and how it works. Carew's specific problem was not just that the slider was excellent, it was that there were multiple sliders. Most pitchers have one out pitch, one weapon they reach for when the situation demands a strikeout. A disciplined hitter who correctly identifies that the out pitch is coming still has a real chance. Carlton had several different versions of the same slider, and every single version came out of his hand looking completely identical. Same arm angle, same grip appearance, same path through the early part of the flight, but one version would drop straight down, another would cut sharply to the arm side, another would do a combination of both at different depths. And because you could not tell which version was coming until the ball was already past you, correctly guessing slider still left you guessing which slider. You were making one guess inside another guess. Carew said most pitchers gave him one problem to solve. Carlton gave him several problems wearing the same face, and they changed every time without warning. Number 4, Johnny Bench. Johnny Bench was the finest catcher of his era and one of the greatest who ever played the position in the entire history of the game. He understood pitching from the inside because he called pitches for a living. He shaped at-bats. He studied pitchers from the receiving end and processed what he saw with the kind of analytical mind that most pitchers themselves never reached. And he described facing Carlton as a chess match, in which Carlton held every piece on the board while Bench was trying to survive the opening moves without losing his most important pieces. The specific thing that terrified Bench the most was Carlton's command of the slider in any count and any situation. In baseball, hitters use the count as a navigation tool. 2 balls and no strikes is a hitter's count. The pitcher needs a strike. He is almost certainly throwing a fastball. The smart hitter sits on it, looks for it, times it up. That educated guess is the most reliable tool a hitter has when facing a difficult pitcher. Carlton removed it entirely. Bench noted that Carlton could throw his slider for a strike regardless of what the count said. 2-0, here comes the slider. 3-1, same answer. Carlton did not follow conventional pitching logic because his command was so complete that conventional logic simply did not constrain him. He could use his best pitch in any situation and trust it to land exactly where he wanted. That left Bench and every other hitter in a permanent state of guessing, with no information to guide the guess. Every count was effectively a full count. Every pitch carried maximum uncertainty, and Carlton loved every second of it. Number 3, Reggie Jackson. Reggie Jackson built his entire legacy on rising to the occasion when the biggest stages and the highest pressure arrived. He thrived in moments that broke other players. He had faced the hardest throwers alive, the craftiest veterans, the most dangerous breaking balls the sport could produce in his era, and he had delivered against all of them when it mattered most. He was fiercely proud of that record and had earned every bit of the pride he carried. And he still looked back at Steve Carlton during his prime years in the late 1970s and said one word: unhittable. Not the toughest he ever faced, not the most challenging pitcher in his experience, essentially unhittable. Reggie Jackson, who delivered some of the most iconic postseason at-bats in baseball history and finished with 563 career home runs, looked at Carlton's slider during those prime seasons and admitted there was simply nothing available to do with it. That statement carries extraordinary weight given its source. Jackson was not a man who gave ground easily or made excuses for himself in public conversation. He was proud, competitive, and had the performance record to back up both qualities without any doubt. When Reggie Jackson says a pitch cannot be hit, the discussion is closed. Number 2, Pete Rose. Pete Rose holds the all-time record for career hits in Major League Baseball. Over 4,000 of them gathered across a career that spanned 24 years of professional competition. He batted over .300 for the large majority of those years, and he scraped and fought for every single number in that total. His whole game was built on trusting his eyes completely and acting on the instincts that decades of watching pitches leave hands and tracking them toward the plate had built into his nervous system. And he called Steve Carlton the greatest left-handed pitcher he ever faced. Not one of the greatest. The greatest. No qualifications, no hedging. The greatest. Rose's problem with Carlton was located entirely in his eyes. And for Pete Rose, that was the most disorienting and unsettling experience he ever had at a baseball field, because those same eyes had delivered more hits than any player in the history of the game. The ball left Carlton's hand and Rose's brain said fastball. Every single visual cue confirmed it. The arm speed was right. The release angle matched. The trajectory toward the plate was exactly where a fastball was supposed to go. Rose would commit. His swing would start, and the ball would arrive somewhere else entirely. He described it as looking like a strike until the very last microsecond. That final sliver of a second before impact is too short for even the most gifted hitting brain ever developed to register new information and make a physical adjustment in response. The same eyes that had produced over 4,000 professional hits hits across a quarter century of relentless, grinding competition were being deliberately and consistently deceived by Carlton's grip and Carlton's spin and Carlton's release. There was nothing to study harder, nothing to change about his approach. Carlton had built a pitch that operated in the space between what a human eye can perceive and what a human body can respond to in time. And that space was exactly wide enough to make Pete Rose feel like he had no idea what was happening. Number 1, Willie Stargell. Willie Stargell was a big man in every way that matters in baseball. 6'2", 225 pounds. Built like someone had set out to design the ideal power hitter and then kept going a little further just to be sure. He was calm at the plate in a way that made other great hitters study him from the dugout. He was a leader and a presence, the kind of player that an entire organization shaped its identity around for more than a decade. He hit 475 career home runs. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame on his first ballot. He played with a quiet confidence and a dignity that made you want to watch him, even when he was just standing in the on-deck circle, taking in the situation, taking his time. And he gave us the single most famous and most perfect sentence ever spoken about what it felt like to stand in against Steve Carlton. Stargell said that hitting against Steve Carlton was like trying to eat soup with a fork. Read that slowly, because it is not just a memorable line. It is the most precise description of a particular kind of structured impossibility that has ever been attached to a baseball pitcher. You can sit down at that table, you can bring your best fork, you can bring everything you have ever developed across a Hall of Fame career, all the talent and preparation and determination and experience that carried you to 475 home runs and a bronze plaque in Cooperstown. And the soup is still going to slip right through, not because you are not good enough, not because you made a mistake or lost your focus in the critical moment, but because the tool in your hand is the wrong tool for this specific task. The fork will never hold the soup. That is not a failure of effort. That is the structure of the situation. And the situation was built so that you could not win no matter what you brought to it. That is what it felt like to face Steve Carlton's slider. Stargell was not simply outmatched. He was placed in a situation that Carlton had engineered from the grip, to the release, to the spin, to the break, to be impossible to solve with the tools a hitter has available. In 127 plate appearances against Carlton, Stargell batted .262 and struck out 33 times. He did manage 5 home runs. Great pitchers give up home runs to great hitters sometimes, but for every moment of success, there were multiple at-bats that ended the same way. Something that looked like a strike, a swing, empty air, a walk back to the dugout, and somewhere in those walks back, the search for the words that would eventually land perfectly. Soup with a fork, the most accurate 6 words ever used to describe Steve Carlton. Stargell found them, and they will outlast everything else either man ever did on a baseball field. Now you understand the slider, but the slider did not operate by itself. It worked because of 2 other things running underneath it, like a foundation that never cracked across 24 years. The silence and the body. In 1973, Carlton stopped talking to the media entirely, not became more selective, not cut back his availability, stopped completely and kept it that way for over a decade. Reporters got nothing from him. No quotes, no interviews, no glimpses into his thinking before or after starts. Most people at the time found it strange or took it personal. But Carlton was not being difficult. He was performing a calculated removal of something he considered a competitive risk. Information is a weapon in any competition. When you speak publicly, you give the opposition something to work with. They can hear your voice and detect your emotional state. Coaches can read your words and pass them to hitters on the bus ride over. You become a person they understand. Persons can be beaten. Carlton had absolutely no interest in becoming someone opposing hitters could relate to. The Phillies actually constructed a $15,000 soundproof room next to the clubhouse specifically for him. They called it the Mood Behavior Room. Before every start, Carlton would go in alone, sit in an easy chair, and stare at a painting for hours. He practiced Eastern philosophy and meditation. He described it as achieving a mind free from distraction. By the time he walked to the mound, there was nothing in his head except the task in front of him. No crowd noise. No emotional residue. No static from the outside world. Just pitching and the complete certainty of how to execute it better than anyone alive. Richie Ashburn called him a craftsman who painted his games with the precision of a masterpiece. Joe Morgan said the silence created a daunting atmosphere in high-pressure moments. Dave Winfield said Carlton's stoic demeanor added psychological pressure that was as real as the velocity, because the human brain searches for the human in an opponent. It needs a crack, a flinch, some sign that the person across the competition is also a person with doubts and vulnerabilities. Carlton gave you nothing. He was a locked door with no handle. Hitters carried that silence with them to the plate, and the weight of it made an already impossible task harder. Under trainer Gus Hoefling, Carlton built his body into something baseball had never seen before. While other players in the 1970s and 1980s were doing standard conditioning, Carlton worked with the precision of an athlete from a future era. The program combined martial arts, strength training, and specialized handwork that was decades ahead of what the sport had standardized. The centerpiece was the rice bucket. Carlton plunged his left arm into a bucket of rice and performed twisting, gripping exercises over and over. The resistance came from every angle simultaneously, building the stabilizing muscles in his hand and forearm to a degree his contemporaries could not match. Those are exactly the muscles responsible for the snap at the end of a slider. More snap produces more spin. More spin produces later break. A later break produces 9 Hall of Famers standing in the batter's box with nothing left to try. His martial arts training gave him explosive leg drive and mechanical efficiency that modern pitching coaches now teach as the correct model. His delivery was described as liquid. He generated power from his lower body and protected his arm across workloads that broke other pitchers. That is why Carlton got stronger in late innings. That is why the slider still snapped in the 8th inning exactly as it did in the 1st. That is why hitters waiting for him to fade always went home having waited for nothing. Bring the whole picture together now. Late innings, Carlton on the mound, stronger than the 1st inning, silent all day, face empty of anything readable, body still loose and moving like a martial artist. And the slider still loaded in his hand, still ready to look like a fastball for 45 feet and then vanish at the last possible moment. 9 Hall of Famers all tried to find an answer for that picture. Not one of them did consistently. George Foster hit .250 against Carlton with 36 strikeouts across 148 plate appearances. Joe Morgan was pushed into at-bats that did not fit his natural patient game. Willie Stargell struck out 33 times in 127 plate appearances. These were not ordinary players on bad nights. These were the best hitters in baseball being held consistently and significantly below their own standards by a single pitcher with a plan they could not unravel no matter how many times they faced it. Carlton pitched for 24 seasons. He won 4 Cy Young Awards in 1972, 1977, 1980, and 1982, becoming the first pitcher in baseball history to reach 4 of them. His career ended with 329 wins and 4,136 strikeouts, placing him 4th all-time. He faced Willie Mays and Hank Aaron when he was still very young. He dominated Pete Rose and Johnny Bench in his prime. He was still effective against Tony Gwynn and Wade Boggs when he was older. 3 generations of great hitters all had to find their own individual way to deal with Steve Carlton. Most of them never did, and as his fastball naturally slowed with age, Carlton adapted by leaning harder on his intelligence, his command, and the full variety of his breaking pitches. He simply found new ways to be the same kind of problem for hitters who thought that time might finally be working in their favor. It never was. When Carlton was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1994, he received 95.6% of the vote on his first ballot. That percentage was higher than Willie Mays, higher than Ted Williams. 2 of the most celebrated, most beloved players who ever stepped onto a baseball field. The people who watched Carlton pitch across 24 seasons, the writers and players and broadcasters who voted, knew exactly what they had witnessed every time they watched him work, and they made sure the official record reflected it without hesitation or debate. Steve Carlton was 3 things working in perfect combination inside one pitcher. The dime spin slider that no brain could track quickly enough to respond to in time. The body that never broke down and kept generating full power deep into every game and every season for more than 2 decades. And the silence that stripped the human element away from competition and left hitters facing something they had no framework for understanding and no tool for solving. Pete Rose called him the best left-handed pitcher he ever saw. Willie Stargell said eating soup with a fork was easier than hitting him. Reggie Jackson said the slider was essentially unhittable. Johnny Bench said Carlton held every card in the game. Rod Carew said there were multiple versions that all looked completely identical. George Foster said he got stronger as the game went on. Dave Winfield said Carlton made him feel like he was being ignored by something that had no interest in noticing him. Joe Morgan said the silence was its own kind of weapon. And Mike Schmidt, who watched it all from third base for years, said he was grateful every day of his career that he never had to step into that batter's box. 9 Hall of Famers. 9 completely different ways of arriving at exactly the same truth. Carlton was a beast, and for a full generation of hitters, stepping to the plate against him was not a competition. It was a lesson in what helplessness feels like when it has been perfectly designed and perfectly delivered, day after day, season after season, by the greatest left-handed pitcher who ever took a baseball into his hand and decided to make the world feel it. If you made it all the way here, hit like and subscribe so you never miss a video like this one. Drop a comment and tell us which quote hit the hardest. The soup with a fork from Stargell, the last microsecond from Rose, or Reggie just flat out saying unhittable? Let us know down below. We will see you in the next one. Jim Palmer called him a monster. He did not say it for effect. He said it because he lived it and because he had watched Billy Martin do things to players that left marks that never fully healed. When Palmer used that word, every baseball man in America understood exactly why. Billy Martin was a monster, but this story has two sides. Before we get into the terror, you have to understand what made him extraordinary. Martin was a baseball genius. He could see angles in a game that other managers simply could not locate. He made his players believe. Before we keep going, hit that hype button on this video right now and give it some hype. Now let us get back into it. He turned struggling teams into contenders almost overnight. His tactical eye was razor sharp. He read baseball games the way a great chess player reads a board, always several moves ahead, always hunting for an edge that other managers could not find. He pushed his players to win at a standard that most managers never dared to set. When his system clicked, the results were remarkable. Championship runs, division titles. He turned struggling franchises around inside a single season through sheer force of tactical will and pure refusal to accept losing. Players who performed under him often described something that felt close to transformation. He made them believe they could genuinely beat anyone. That was the gift. That was the version of Billy Martin that record books celebrate and highlight reels, preserve for countless generations of fans who only saw the wins. But that gift came wrapped in something genuinely dark, because the same obsession that made him great also made him paranoid, explosive, and physically dangerous. The legends who played for him and against him tell the same story from different directions. He kept everyone around him in a constant state of alert every single day. 9 men in particular know exactly what that experience looked and felt like from the inside and from across the diamond. Their stories paint the complete picture of who Billy Martin really was when the cameras were not celebrating him and nobody was handing him a trophy. We are starting at the top and counting all the way down to number 1. These are the men who experienced the monster up close. Number 9 is Jim Palmer. Now, Palmer was not a Yankee. He was the enemy. He was the Baltimore Orioles ace who made a career out of making the best hitters in the American League look completely helpless. 3 Cy Young Awards, Hall of Fame credentials. A man who dominated his era with a combination of precision, durability, and competitive fire that very few pitchers in baseball history have ever matched at the same level. In any normal baseball world, a player of Palmer's stature would command a certain baseline of professional respect, even from opponents who faced him regularly. You might not like losing to him, but you would recognize what he was. Billy Martin did not operate in a normal baseball world. Martin operated in one entirely of his own design, governed by his own rules, and fueled by a need to control every narrative around him. In that world, greatness wearing the opposing uniform was not something to acknowledge. It was something to undermine before it had a chance to beat you. The feud between Martin and Palmer became one of the defining rivalries of the 1970s. Martin managed teams that faced Palmer repeatedly across multiple seasons, and every time those matchups came around, Martin refused to let it stay as just baseball. He took it personally every time. He started calling Palmer a pretty boy. Not quietly, not in private, in public, through reporters, in front of cameras, on the record where Palmer would be sure to hear it and everyone would be sure to read it. Martin insisted that Palmer was more interested in how he looked than in how he performed. He suggested that Palmer cared more about his image and his appearance than about competing and winning baseball games. Think carefully about what that strategy is really doing. Jim Palmer was one of the greatest pitchers alive at that time, a man who had earned everything he had on a baseball field through years of relentless work and elite preparation. And Billy Martin was standing in front of reporters calling him a pretty boy, specifically to strip away the professional respect that performance had earned. This was not competitive trash talk between players of equal standing swapping barbs in the dugout tunnel. This was a manager using the press as a deliberate weapon to psychologically destabilize one of the league's most elite performers before facing him on the field where it counted. The shouting matches between them became legendary among writers who covered the sport closely during that era. There were tactical disputes that turned deeply personal in a hurry. There were insults that went far beyond any reasonable boundary between professional competitors. Martin wanted Palmer rattled. He wanted Palmer standing on the mound with those words circling inside his head, instead of thinking clearly about his mechanics and his location. Sports writers of the era noted that Martin made the game lean toward professional wrestling, that he positioned himself as the bad boy of the sport and needed conflict to feel relevant. Palmer had the resolve to withstand the psychological assault and keep performing at the level his career demanded. But the fact that Martin felt the need to attack a future Hall of Famer through personal insults delivered through the media tells you everything about the lengths he would go to in order to get any possible advantage. This was number 9, and it only gets worse from here. Number 8 is Dave Winfield, and this story is different from the others because the terror Winfield experienced did not always arrive directly from Martin himself. It came from the machine that Martin operated inside of. George Steinbrenner had signed Winfield to a massive long-term contract and almost immediately regretted it. The owner became consumed by an obsession to tear Winfield down and diminish his standing within the organization he had been signed to represent. Steinbrenner went to extraordinary lengths to make that happen. He hired a man named Howard Spira, a gambler with underground connections, specifically to dig up damaging information on his own star outfielder. That is not a metaphor. The owner of one of the most famous franchises in professional sports paid someone with gambling connections to destroy the reputation of a player on his own roster. And where was Billy Martin through all of this? He was exactly where he always was when Steinbrenner was running one of his power plays from the owner's box. He was the pawn on the board. Martin maintained a cold and deliberate professional distance from Winfield throughout the period they shared in that organization. He kept that distance not because of a personal grievance, but because that was the cost of operating in Steinbrenner's world. To remain in the owner's good graces, you moved against whoever Steinbrenner wanted moved against. For a player of Winfield's stature and professionalism, this environment was corrosive in a way that extended far beyond anything physical. He came to New York to play baseball at the highest level, to compete, to win, to represent those pinstripes the way they were always supposed to be represented. Instead, he found himself caught in the middle of a war between two men who both treated him as a piece in their larger game. Martin, as a toxic element in that environment, meant that Winfield could never fully settle into the professional standard the organization was supposed to hold itself to. Being near Martin meant being near chaos at all times, and that chaos had a way of spreading outward and touching everything in its radius. Winfield was an all-star with exceptional talent and professionalism in everything he brought to that clubhouse every day he reported. He deserved a manager who recognized what that meant and protected it. Instead, he got cold distance, calculated maneuvering, and the quiet knowledge that his own manager was a willing instrument in an effort to damage him. That was number 8, Dave Winfield. Number 7 is Rod Carew. And this one is important because Carew is one of the cases where Martin genuinely helped a player reach a higher level of performance. When they were together in Minnesota, Martin pushed Carew in ways that produced real and lasting results. Martin even claimed credit for teaching Carew how to steal home, one of the most electric and daring plays in the entire game of baseball. And the truth is that Carew did flourish under Martin. He developed into one of the greatest hitters the sport has ever seen, a player who won batting titles consistently. So credit goes where it is due, but that success came with a long and complicated shadow behind it that deserves equal attention. Because Martin's brand of baseball, what he called Billy Ball, was an aggressive and high-risk system that consumed everything it came into contact with over time. Martin believed in pushing players well past their physical limits. That applied to his entire roster and most visibly to his pitching staff. He would force young pitchers to throw complete games at a volume that modern pitching coaches would call reckless and medically irresponsible. The physical toll on his rosters across every stop he made was documented and undeniable. Players burned out under his system. Arms got overused and broken down before they reached their full career potential. Men who should have had 5 more productive years in the league saw those years shortened because of what Martin demanded from them and their bodies. Carew's approach to hitting was the opposite of Billy Ball in several fundamental ways. Carew was a thinker, precise in every part of his preparation and execution, methodical in how he approached each at-bat as its own problem to solve with intelligence and discipline. Martin was reactive, intense, and always pressing to force the action before the situation fully developed on its own. When those two competing approaches clashed over how to run a team and manage a roster day after day, the friction was real even when both men were producing wins together in the standings. What happened when Martin took his system to Oakland revealed the full and honest picture of what Billy Ball ultimately produced. The A's responded initially to the energy Martin brought into that clubhouse. The wins came, the momentum built, the whole operation felt alive again. But the pace Martin demanded was never sustainable because it was built on consumption rather than development. Players hit a wall that the system had helped build for them. Patience ran out across the roster. Morale collapsed from the inside out. Martin was fired. It was the same cycle it had always been at every stop, and it would always be the same cycle. Build something fast and burn it down faster. Carew had enough individual talent and resilience to outlast what Martin put him through. Many other players across Martin's career did not get that luxury. That was number 7, Rod Carew. Number 6 is Willie Randolph. And Randolph might be the most revealing name on this entire list for what he represents, about the specific way Billy Martin operated when he was at his most destructive. He was not a volatile personality who invited confrontation. He was not the kind of player who created drama or gave a manager cause to single him out for behavior. Randolph was the consummate professional in every sense of that phrase. He showed up every single day, did his preparation correctly, played intelligent and reliable baseball, and carried himself with a dignity that teammates across the entire roster genuinely respected. In any healthy organization run by a leader with any reasonable standard of fairness, a player of that character would be exactly what the manager protects and values above almost everything else in the clubhouse. But under Billy Martin, there was no such thing as a healthy organization. Martin would target Randolph during the middle of games, without warning and without apparent logic. Not in a quiet private conversation after the final out with the locker room door closed. In the open, where teammates and coaches and cameras and everyone paying attention could see exactly what was happening in real time. Martin would publicly second-guess Randolph's decisions on the field during the game while it was still being played. He would make it visible and loud so that the point would land on the entire roster and not just on the man it was aimed at. Think carefully about the sustained psychological effect of that on a professional athlete trying to perform at an elite level day after day. You are competing in the major leagues, which demands your complete and total mental focus on every play. You have to track base runners simultaneously, read pitchers, anticipate cutoff plays, and execute movements under pressure while processing information at a speed most people cannot imagine. And running underneath all of that work, every single inning, every single game, is the quiet awareness that if your read is imperfect or your decision is wrong, your own manager will make sure the entire stadium and every reporter in the press box knows it was your fault. That weight settles into your game. It tightens your instincts. It replaces confidence with caution, and caution is one of the worst things a middle infielder can have on a baseball field. Randolph survived Martin and built a career that speaks entirely for itself across many years and many achievements. But the fact that even the most composed and professionally grounded player on the roster was not protected from Martin's unpredictable public fury tells you exactly how thoroughly his toxicity reached into every corner of that environment. Nobody was safe. That was number 6, Willie Randolph. Number 5 is Graig Nettles. And Nettles gave us the one quote that probably captures the full and honest Billy Martin experience more precisely than anything else ever said about the man. At any point during or after his career, Nettles was the Yankees captain. He was not a fringe voice or a casual observer who dropped in and out of the situation. He was at the absolute center of the Bronx Zoo era, inside the most chaotic and celebrated clubhouse in baseball during its wildest and most talked about years. He had a front row seat to everything that unfolded in that building. He had earned the right to speak with real authority on what it meant to play for Billy Martin day after day. And this is what he said: "The best thing about being a Yankee is playing for Billy. The worst thing is having to play for him." Read that one more time slowly. The best thing and the worst thing, coming from the exact same man and the exact same experience. That is not a contradiction wrapped in clever wordplay. That is the full and uncompromising truth of Billy Martin compressed into a single sentence by someone who lived it from the inside. Players respected his will to win at a level that very few managers in the sport have ever matched. They respected the fact that he studied opposing teams like a general plotting a military campaign before his troops crossed any line. He could outguess opposing managers on a consistent basis when the game was on the line. His instincts for matchups and in-game adjustments were sharp enough to actually change outcomes of games that seemed already decided. When Martin's teams were playing their best baseball under his direction, it genuinely felt like he was operating on a level of awareness that other managers in the dugout opposite him simply could not reach. That part of what Nettles said was real and deserved, but the other part was equally real and equally deserved of honest attention. Martin was, by the accounts of everyone who knew him closely, totally insecure beneath the aggressive and combative exterior. He constructed imaginary enemies when real ones were not readily available because his internal anxiety required constant confirmation that he was the one in control of every situation around him. He kept every player in a state of permanent uncertainty because certainty for his players felt threatening to him. His paranoia ran through every decision he made in a clubhouse, every public statement he delivered, every relationship he formed or destroyed, across every stop he made in baseball. Over time, that atmosphere exhausted every roster he managed. Teams would eventually stop buying into the system. When the belief drained out and the players started tuning him out, the authority Martin had spent years constructing collapsed around him rapidly. Firing followed every single time without exception. He was brilliant, and he was his own worst enemy, and he could never separate those two things long enough to save himself. That was number 5, Graig Nettles. Number 4 is Goose Gossage, and Gossage is one of the most important voices in this story because of who he was as a competitor. He was a Hall of Fame closer, a man who was built specifically for the highest possible pressure situations the sport could create. He had seen everything baseball could place in front of an athlete across his long and celebrated career at the very top of the game. He had faced the most intense moments the sport produces and found a way to rise to those moments consistently. His entire professional identity was built around performing under conditions that would crack most people. So when Goose Gossage chose specific and careful words to describe what it was like to play for Billy Martin every single day, those words carried the full weight of a man who knew pressure from the inside and was not someone given to exaggeration about it. He called it a constant state of alert, not occasional stress that came and went, not demanding in a way that pushed you toward your best version. Constant. Every single day in that clubhouse, players across the entire roster were on edge without relief. They were waiting for something to drop, They were watching each other and watching Martin to see who might be targeted next and for what reason. They were bracing themselves for whatever Martin might decide to do before the day was done. Would he call someone out publicly through a reporter that afternoon in a way that made the whole team aware of who was in trouble? Would a mid-game explosion target someone who had been producing consistent results all week? Would he push a pitcher into his 10th consecutive complete game attempt when the pitcher had nothing left to give and everyone in the stadium could see it? Martin used the media as a deliberate and calculated disciplinary weapon throughout his career at every stop he made. When he wanted to punish a player or assert dominance over the room or send a specific message to the entire roster, he went to reporters and said exactly what would cause maximum impact when it appeared in print the next morning. He made statements publicly that left individual players exposed and vulnerable inside the organization they were trying to represent professionally. The player then had to face his teammates the next day, knowing his own manager had gone on record criticizing his performance and his judgment. That kind of public humiliation does not remain contained in one corner of a clubhouse. It travels through the entire space and poisons the trust that teams need to function at their best under any kind of pressure. The most revealing part of Gossage's account is the simple fact that it came from a man who genuinely could not be rattled by almost anything baseball put in front of him. Elite closers at his level have mental toughness that is fundamental to the position they play. And yet even Gossage described the Martin atmosphere with discomfort that was plainly real. That tells you everything. When a man built to thrive under extraordinary pressure describes your environment as genuinely troubling, the environment is not intense. It is broken. There is a permanent and important difference between a coach who demands your best and a man who controls through fear. Martin was the second thing. That was number 4. Goose Gossage. Number 3 is Ed Whitson. And if you want to understand precisely how far Billy Martin's destructive nature could actually reach when it was running at full power, this is the story that removes any remaining doubt. Whitson was a talented pitcher, a man with real and documented ability who signed a significant contract to come to New York and compete at the highest level of the sport. The Yankees were supposed to be the peak of his professional career, the biggest market, the most famous stadium, the most watched team in the country. Instead, it became the worst chapter of his baseball life. Martin's relentless public criticism of Whitson was tearing the man down long before anything turned physical. Martin would pick apart Whitson's performances through the press after difficult outings, constructing maximum embarrassment in the most visible and merciless media market in the country. Whitson was already fighting the enormous pressure that came with pitching in New York. Every struggle is louder there. Every bad start is amplified by a press corps that never stops, and a fan base that remembers everything. Whitson was going through a stretch where the results on the field were not matching the contract he had signed, and instead of managing that situation with patience and private conversation the way a healthy organization would, Martin added to the noise. He kept the public pressure on a player who was already running out of room internally. He made it worse deliberately and consistently. That pattern of second-guessing and public shaming was exactly the kind of sustained psychological damage that pushes a man toward his breaking point. Then came September 1985 at the Cross Keys Inn in Baltimore. The accumulated tension from months of that treatment finally broke completely open in a confrontation that did not stay in one room or stay quiet. It spilled across multiple floors of that hotel before anyone could contain it. By the time it was finished, the physical damage on both sides was documented and extensive. Martin suffered a broken right arm, cracked ribs, and a bruised side. Whitson came away with a cracked rib, a fractured hand, and a split lip. These were not minor injuries from a brief and accidental confrontation. These were the injuries of two men who had come after each other with genuine and sustained violence. The professional cost extended far beyond the medical damage. New York turned on Whitson completely. Fans who sided with Martin made it publicly clear that Whitson was no longer welcome in that city. A pitcher with genuine ability and a lucrative contract was effectively driven out. He was traded back to San Diego. His time in New York ended in exile from the place he had come to build something lasting. Martin was fired at the end of the 1985 season, but moved on to his next opportunity as he always did. Whitson was the one who paid the price that could not be recovered. He lost New York. He lost everything he had come there hoping to build. That was number 3. Ed Whitson. Number 2 is Dave Boswell. And this story happened long before the Yankees circus was even fully constructed. This one unfolded in Minnesota in 1969 when Martin was managing the Twins through what should have been a celebrated season. And it stands as one of the most disturbing and direct illustrations of the physical danger that playing for Billy Martin placed real men in. Boswell was not a marginal player struggling to hold a roster spot. He was a 20-game winner. He was having the kind of dominant and career-defining season that opens every door available in professional baseball. The Twins were in contention. The season was going well by every meaningful measure. And then came the night behind the Lindell AC Sports Bar in Detroit. The trouble began when Boswell believed a coach had reported his behavior to Martin and gotten him in trouble he felt was unfair. Words heated up between Boswell and someone nearby. Martin stepped in to intervene and manage the situation before it grew. And very quickly and violently, it stopped being any kind of management and became something far worse than what it had started as. Martin knocked Boswell unconscious. His own pitcher, his own 20-game winner, left him on the ground behind a Detroit sports bar needing 20 stitches to close the damage to his face. And when reporters found Martin afterward and asked him about what had happened in that alley, he showed them exactly the kind of man he was when the public presentation was stripped away. He told them plainly that when Boswell came off the wall, he hit him again. No pause before answering, no visible remorse for the action, no recognition that putting your best pitcher in the hospital was something that should never have happened, regardless of whatever started the confrontation. The Minnesota Twins fired Martin at the end of that season despite the fact that he had delivered a first-place finish and a division title for the organization. The reasoning was straightforward. They decided they could not retain a manager who, as one account described the situation, had a fetish for punching out his own pitchers. Results mattered, but this went beyond results. Martin lost a job. He always found another one, but Boswell lost something harder to fully measure or replace. He missed several starts during what should have been the strongest stretch of his entire career. The momentum of a season that was building towards something significant got interrupted by his own manager's fists in an alley. Playing for Billy Martin was not simply professionally difficult. For some men, it was a genuine and real physical threat. Dave Boswell found that out in 1969 in the most painful way possible. That was number 2 on our list. Number 1 is Reggie Jackson, and this is the story that defines Billy Martin more completely and more honestly than any other, because of where it happened and how many people witnessed it. This one did not unfold in a parking lot at midnight, far from any cameras. This one did not occur in a hotel corridor in Baltimore in the small hours of the morning. This one happened on national television in front of 34,000 fans during a Major League Baseball game at Fenway Park in Boston. The entire country was watching. June 18, 1977. The New York Yankees were in Boston for a nationally televised game. When Steinbrenner signed Jackson to a 5-year contract worth nearly $3 million following the 1976 season, he did it against Martin's explicit wishes. Martin did not want Jackson. He had made that plain. Steinbrenner forced the pairing anyway, setting up a 3-way toxic arrangement between owner, manager, and star player that was always going to break in a spectacular way. On that June afternoon at Fenway Park, it did. Jim Rice hit a fly ball to right field. Jackson tracked it down and, by Martin's judgment, did not pursue it with enough urgency. The ball dropped for a double. Martin watched from the dugout and made his decision without a single second of hesitation or deliberation. He pulled Reggie Jackson off the field in the middle of the inning, not at the end of the half inning when the play was complete and the moment had passed. Not after a pitching change that could have provided some cover for the move. Mid-inning. He sent Paul Blair out to replace one of the most famous and accomplished players in baseball, while the game was actively and visibly being played in front of everyone, in front of 34,000 people filling Fenway Park, in front of the national television audience watching from home across the country. This was not quiet correction or private discipline delivered away from the spotlight. This was a deliberate and calculated public execution designed to humiliate Reggie Jackson in the most visible and permanent way available. Jackson walked into the dugout, and the confrontation that followed nearly became a full and public brawl on the bench. Jackson screamed at Martin. Martin charged toward him and had to be physically restrained by coaches and players before the situation turned into something that could not be pulled back from. The words exchanged were loud and direct and full of genuine rage. Jackson said everything he was feeling in that moment, and he said it with force and clarity. Martin was prepared to physically fight his own star player on his own bench, in front of his own team and a national audience. Jackson described the deeper meaning behind what happened that day in words that cut through everything around them. He said he was just a black man to them who did not know how to be subservient. He understood exactly what Martin was doing beyond the surface justification of a lazy fly ball. This was never really about hustle on one play in the 4th inning. Martin was using that nationally televised moment to issue a statement that had nothing to do with fundamentals. He was demanding submission in the most public forum available. He was telling Jackson, the owner, and every player in that dugout that no contract and no reputation and no level of celebrity could protect anyone in his clubhouse from his authority over them. And Reggie Jackson was never going to accept that. Not from Martin. Not from anyone in any uniform. Steinbrenner ordered Martin fired that same night, then changed his mind and let him stay in the job. But the conflict did not end and it did not soften. It built further through the rest of that season and deep into 1978. During a series against the Kansas City Royals, Jackson defied a bunt sign, choosing to bunt even after Martin had removed the sign as a signal to swing away. For Martin, this was the final unforgivable act of open defiance. He treated it as deliberate and direct insubordination that could not go unanswered. Jackson received a 5-game suspension, but even winning that exchange could not keep Martin contained. In a public statement that became one of the most famous and repeated lines in baseball history, Martin labeled Jackson a born liar and called Steinbrenner convicted. That sentence cost him his job immediately. He resigned. The toxic loop that had been building since the day Jackson signed his contract finally consumed itself completely from the inside. What the Reggie Jackson story lays bare is the absolute core of what made Billy Martin dangerous and ultimately self-defeating as a leader. He could not coexist with a man who carried real and independent power. He could not accept someone who refused to be broken down and made smaller by the manager's decisions. He turned a championship-level baseball team into a daily war between ego and authority. He made the greatest team sport in the world into a daily test of one man's insecurity and what it demanded from everyone around him. And everyone in that clubhouse paid the price of proximity to that every single day of the season. That was number one. That was Reggie Jackson. So what do you do with a man like Billy Martin? How do you fully and honestly measure the weight of everything he was when you lay it all out together? He was a baseball genius. Mickey Mantle, his closest friend in the game, and a man who knew him more honestly than almost anyone alive, said that Martin was fiery enough that players gave him their genuine respect. And Mantle was right. Players did respect him. They respected his mind, his hunger, and his absolute refusal to accept losing on any terms. They respected what he was willing to sacrifice to find a way to win. His teams produced results across multiple cities and multiple franchises. His tactics genuinely worked when they were given time to work. His eye for the game was exceptional, and the record books confirm every bit of it. But Mantle also said that Martin carried a chip on his shoulder that resembled a whole lumberyard. And that was equally real and equally important to understand. Every victory he produced came with a cost attached to it somewhere. Every championship left wreckage behind it in the people who had been around it. The research summarizes the legacy honestly: broken arms and cracked ribs. And behind those words are real men, real careers that got shortened or derailed, real damage done to players who came to professional baseball with ambitions and deserved a manager who could challenge them without destroying them. Goose Gossage felt it in the tension of every single day he walked into that clubhouse and braced himself for what Martin might decide to do before the final out was recorded. Greg Nettles felt it in the exhausting and unresolvable contradiction of playing for a man he genuinely respected and genuinely feared in equal and simultaneous measure. Willie Randolph felt it every time he made a decision on the field and held his breath waiting for the reaction from the dugout. Rod Carew felt it in the relentless and physically unsustainable pace of a system that burned brilliantly in the short term, but was never constructed to endure. Dave Winfield felt it in being positioned as collateral damage in a war that was never truly about him or his performance. Jim Palmer felt it from across the field in a series of personal insults designed specifically to shake his confidence before he could take them out. Ed Whitson felt it most physically, and finally in Baltimore in September 1985. And Reggie Jackson felt it in front of the entire country on national television, in a Boston dugout where his own manager had just told the whole world exactly what kind of submission he expected. What baseball learned slowly and at real and lasting cost over the decades that followed is a lesson that holds regardless of what era you are watching. Winning does not excuse cruelty. Leadership built entirely on fear, and psychological domination is not leadership in any meaningful sense. It is control, and control that is not grounded in respect always fractures eventually, no matter how many wins pile up alongside it. The game moved forward. Clubhouse culture evolved through hard experience. Players gained rights and protections over time that made the kind of environment Martin created harder to sustain and easier to challenge. The sport became more honest about the real human cost of competition at the highest level. But it took men like Jackson and Gossage and Whitson and Boswell and Randolph and all the others who shared a uniform or a diamond with Billy Martin to pay that cost before the lessons could be learned by everyone watching. That is the truest and most honest part of the Billy Martin legacy. Not the championships or the tactical innovations or the Billy Ball philosophy that filled newspaper columns for years. The price that real people paid so that someone else could put a trophy in a case. He burned every house he ever built. And somehow, every single time the smoke cleared and the wreckage cooled, someone handed him the matches and pointed him toward the next one.
But you lied when you said you knew Raj and me.
And you lied when you said we'd come to your banquet, too.
If we showed up now, we'd just be trying to make your lie good. You can't make a foul ball fair by moving the baseline. It's just not in the rules.
More than that, Hutch. It'd mean we were lying to
Roger Maris. Here's the windup. Fastball hit deep to right. This could be it. Way back there. Holy cow, he's another standing ovation for Roger Maris. 61 home runs, and they're still fighting for that ball out there. People were climbing over each other's backs.
When Roger Maris chased down Babe Ruth's sacred record in 1961, the entire baseball world wanted him to fail. The greatest individual achievement in sports history was happening, and the overwhelming sentiment was hostility. The press hounded him in the streets like he had committed a crime. The commissioner created a rule mid-season to protect Ruth's ghost. Fans sent him hate mail by the thousands calling him unworthy, a fraud, telling him he had no right to touch the Babe's legacy. His hair fell out in clumps from the stress. Even baseball legends who had played at the highest level openly said he did not deserve to break the most famous record in sports. Rogers Hornsby, a career .358 hitter, went on record saying Maris was not the right man for this moment. The narrative that summer was clear. Roger Maris was the wrong guy at the wrong time chasing the wrong dream. He was an outsider from North Dakota who did not fit the mold of a New York Yankee hero. He was not flashy like Mickey Mantle. He was not charming with the press. He was quiet, private, uncomfortable with the spotlight burning through him every day. But here's what the media and fans and historians did not understand. The guys who actually faced him on the field, the elite pitchers who threw strikes to him, and base runners who tested his arm in right field, they were not talking about asterisks or worthiness, or whether he fit some imaginary standard. They were talking about survival. They were describing a hitter who was truly built different, a player whose presence in the batter's box created a clinical, almost scientific terror that no amount of public hate could erase. So what did those legends see that everyone else missed? What made Roger Maris so terrifying that Hall of Fame pitchers admitted they were glad they did not have to face him every day? The answer is not just in the 61 home runs. It is in the 10 specific ways he systematically broke the will of the best players in baseball. And if you are enjoying this story and want more deep dives into the legends who lived this game, make sure to give hype to this video. It helps us keep bringing you these stories. Now let's work our way down through the nightmare that was facing Roger Maris. Number 10, the Old Guard Panic, Rogers Hornsby and the Generational Meltdown. Rogers Hornsby was one of the most abrasive figures in baseball history. A career .358 hitter who never met a compliment he could not turn into an insult. So difficult that he cycled through teams despite his talent, because nobody could stand working with him. But Hornsby was also a legend, and when Maris started chasing Ruth's record, Hornsby was publicly terrified for the sake of the game itself. He went on record saying Maris was not worthy of breaking the record, that the new game with livelier balls and shorter fences was erasing the achievements of the past, that the history books were being rewritten by inferior players benefiting from easier conditions. This was genuine generational fear. The idea that a loner from North Dakota, a guy who did not play by the social rules of the New York media, could rewrite baseball history was more than Hornsby could handle. For Hornsby and the Old Guard, Maris represented a threat to the natural order. Baseball belonged to certain kinds of players, charismatic players who understood their place in the mythology. Maris was none of those things. He was straightforward, blunt, and yet he was about to replace Babe Ruth. That was unacceptable. In spring 1962, after Maris had broken the record, the tension reached a boiling point. Someone arranged for Maris to pose for a photograph with Hornsby, probably meant as reconciliation, but Maris refused. He said, "Why should I? He has done nothing but run me down for a year. Why would I smile for a camera with someone who has spent months publicly questioning my worthiness?" Hornsby responded by calling Maris a bush leaguer and a little punk, said Maris could not carry his bat, could not shine his shoes, was not fit to be mentioned in the same sentence as the real legends. This was a manifestation of the terror Maris represented to the establishment. He was rewriting the record books without asking permission, without playing by the unspoken rules of deference for the past. And for legends like Hornsby, who had built their identities on being the toughest guys in the toughest era, Maris was an existential threat. The fact that he refused to bow down to Hornsby was the same refusal he showed pitchers who tried to intimidate him with brushbacks. Maris did not care about your reputation. He did not care if you were a Hall of Famer. He cared about winning the at-bat, and that terrified the people who thought baseball belonged to them. Number 9, the quiet assassin who never cracked. Rocky Colavito's perspective on consistency under fire. Rocky Colavito was not just any player. He was a rival power hitter and a contemporary of Roger Maris. Colavito played for Cleveland and was a slugging icon, 6-time All-Star, led the league in home runs. He understood what it took to perform at the highest level when the entire league was gunning for you, and even Colavito expressed a deep respect and genuine fear for what Maris could do under extreme circumstances. What terrified Colavito was not Maris's power or swing, it was his mental fortress. Colavito watched Maris stay remarkably consistent under the most intense media scrutiny in sports history, and he could not understand how any human being could function under that weight without falling apart. In 1961, Maris was not just chasing a record, he was being hunted, hounded in the streets. He could not attend Catholic Mass in peace because reporters tracked him down. He could not eat a meal in public without being mobbed. His hair was literally falling out in clumps because his body was shutting down from stress. The entire world was watching him with every single swing. Every at-bat was analyzed. Every strikeout was used as evidence he did not belong. Every home run was treated with suspicion instead of celebration. And through all that chaos, Maris maintained a disciplined focus that would have broken 99% of professional athletes. Colavito understood this difficulty because he knew how hard it is to stay locked in when everyone is rooting for your failure. When the narrative is already written and you are cast as the villain. When the pressure is not just to perform, but to perform perfectly every time or be destroyed for it. Maris had built what some described as an inviolable wall around his private life. It was survival. He was a family man who actively scorned the bright lights of Manhattan. While other Yankees enjoyed the nightlife and celebrity, Maris preferred quiet reflection, away from the noise, away from people who wanted a piece of him. This was his actual personality. A straightforward Midwestern style that did not bend to meet the expectations of the New York media machine. And that phlegmatic attitude allowed him to process the game without letting external chaos affect his mechanics or approach. His teammates and rivals called him a cocky pro, not cocky in the loud sense. Cocky in the quiet sense that he knew what he was capable of and did not need anyone's approval to do it. For pitchers facing Maris, this mental strength was a unique terror. You could not rattle him. You could not get in his head. You could only throw your best pitch and hope he did not turn it into a souvenir. That unshakable focus is rarer than talent. Talent is everywhere in the majors. But the ability to perform at an elite level while the entire world tries to tear you down, that separated Maris from everyone else. Number 8. The statistical nightmare. Peak dominance that crushed the league average. Let's talk numbers for a moment, but in a way that actually tells you a story instead of just drowning you in data. Between 1960 and 1961, Roger Maris hit 100 home runs. 39 in his first MVP season, 61 in the record-breaking campaign. Now on the surface, that is obviously impressive, but the real terror becomes clear when you put it in context. The American League average for a starting player in those years was about 12 home runs per season. 12. Maris was not just above average, he was hitting nearly 4 times the league average for power. 4 times? That is not a hot streak. That is not luck. That is complete statistical domination over an entire league of professional baseball players. He drove in 253 runs across those 2 seasons, 112 in 1960, 141 in 1961. The league average was about 62 runs batted in per season. Maris led the American League in runs batted in back-to-back years, and it was not even close. He was putting runs on the board at a rate that made every other hitter in the league look ordinary by comparison. His slugging percentage over that 2-year stretch was around .605. The league average was .410. Think about what that gap means in practical terms. It means that when Maris made contact, the ball traveled farther and faster than when almost anyone else in the league made contact. It means pitchers could not get comfortable outs. They could not rely on weak grounders or lazy fly balls. When Maris swung, something violent happened. He won 2 Most Valuable Player awards in those 2 years. Not just won them. Unanimously recognized as the best player in baseball. There was no debate, no controversy, just pure acknowledgement that nobody in the American League was doing what Roger Maris was doing. And he appeared in 2 World Series during that span, directly impacting championship outcomes when the stakes were at their absolute highest. This was not a guy who racked up stats in meaningless games and then disappeared when it mattered. This was a player who elevated his game when the lights got brighter. Now here is where the terror really sets in for pitchers. This was not luck. This was not a fluke. This was a sustained 2-year-long takeover of the American League. And what made it truly terrifying was the efficiency. Maris was not just hitting home runs. He was doing it in fewer opportunities than the legends of the past. When he hit his 60th home run, the one that tied Babe Ruth's record, he had done it in 684 plate appearances. Ruth needed 689. Maris was actually more efficient in his pursuit of 60 than Ruth was, despite all the noise and controversy about the longer schedule supposedly giving him an unfair advantage. For opposing pitchers, the numbers told a brutally simple story. If you made a mistake, if you missed your spot by even a few inches, if you left a pitch anywhere near the heart of the plate, it was leaving the park. Not might leave, not could leave, was leaving. And Maris was getting to those 60 mistakes faster and more efficiently than anyone in the history of the game. That is not something you game plan for. That is something you pray does not happen to you on any given night. Number 7. The day the record books needed a new rule. the 1961 pressure cooker. The 1961 season was not just a chase for a record. It was a psychological siege unlike anything professional baseball had ever witnessed. It was a cultural moment that transcended sports and became a referendum on what America valued, who deserved to be called a hero, and whether the modern game could ever live up to the mythology of the past. Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle, known to the world as the M&M Boys, were both on pace to break Babe Ruth's single-season record of 60 home runs. They shared an apartment in Queens with their teammate Bob Cerv. Despite what the media desperately tried to sell to the public, framing them as bitter rivals fighting for the same crown, the truth was completely different. They were close friends who genuinely loved being around each other. Mantle later admitted this publicly, but even that friendship could not fully shield either of them from the sheer magnitude of pressure that was building with every game. Let's walk through how that pressure escalated month by month. In April, Maris hit 1 home run. Just 1. Mickey Mantle hit 7. The media and the fans were completely focused on Mantle as the primary threat to Ruth's record. Maris was barely a blip on the radar. He was the other guy, the supporting actor in what was supposed to be Mantle's story. Then May happened. Maris exploded for 11 home runs. Mantle had 7. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Maris was hitting them in bunches now, long balls coming in clusters that made it impossible to ignore what was happening. The press started paying attention. The questions started getting more intense. By June, Maris had 15 home runs in the season. Mantle had 11. Both players were legitimately on pace to break Ruth's record. The pressure went from high to extreme. This was no longer a fun story about the M&M Boys having a great year. This was a serious threat to the most sacred record in sports, and the baseball world started to panic. Then came July. And July is when everything changed. On July 17, 1961, baseball commissioner Ford Frick held a press conference. Frick was not just the commissioner. He was a former ghostwriter for Babe Ruth, a personal friend of the Babe, a man who had literally helped craft Ruth's public image and legacy. And Frick was watching Ruth's record come under assault from a player he did not think deserved to touch it. So he issued a ruling. He declared that any record broken after the 154th game of the season would require what he called a distinctive mark. This was the birth of the infamous asterisk concept. The ruling was transparently designed to protect Ruth's legacy. The logic was that Ruth set his record in a 154-game season, so any record set beyond that threshold in the new 162-game schedule was somehow tainted. It was a rule created in the middle of the season specifically to diminish whatever Maris accomplished. The message could not have been clearer. The establishment did not want Roger Maris to be the home run king. This ruling added a profound and varied emotion to the entire chase. It was not just pressure now. It was hostility. Official, institutional hostility from the very top of the sport. For opposing pitchers, the terror became twofold. They were facing a hitter who was in a historic zone, locked in at a level most players never experienced in their entire careers. And they were doing it under a global spotlight, where every mistake they made was amplified 1,000 times and would become a permanent part of baseball history. By August, Maris had 11 more home runs. Mantle had 9. Maris passed Mantle for the final time and took sole possession of the chase. The pressure reached maximum levels. Maris was now the target, not the co-star, the target. Every interview was hostile. Every question was a trap. People were not asking if he could do it. They were asking if he should do it, if he had the right to do it, if it would count. Then September came and Mickey Mantle got injured. Mantle finished the month with 1 home run. His body gave out under the strain. Maris hit 9 more in September. He was now pursuing the record completely alone. All of the weight, all of the pressure, all of the hate, it was on his shoulders and his shoulders only. He started losing his hair in clumps. The stress was so severe that his body was physically shutting down. He was hounded everywhere he went. Fans and reporters stalked him in the streets. He could not find peace anywhere, not even in church. And yet he kept showing up, kept taking his at-bats, kept doing his job. The season ended with Maris hitting 61 home runs and Mantle finishing with 54. Together, they had hit 115 home runs as teammates, an all-time record that may never be broken. But the story was never about the combined total. It was about what it cost, what it took mentally and emotionally and physically to get there. And for the pitchers who had to face Roger Maris during that gauntlet, during those final months when the entire world was watching and judging and waiting for him to fail, the terror was in knowing that no matter how much pressure was on him, no matter how much his hair was falling out, or how much the commissioner was stacking the deck against him, he was still going to punish your mistakes. He was still going to make you pay for being in the strike zone. That is a level of mental toughness that is impossible to prepare for. Number 6. The howitzer that made runners think twice. Gold Glove defense and the no-fly zone. A huge part of the terror Roger Maris created had nothing to do with his bat. It was his glove, and more specifically, his arm. In 1960, Maris won the Gold Glove Award for his outstanding play in right field. This was not some token honor. This was recognition that Maris was a complete ball player whose defensive style was built on leaping and diving catches and a flat trajectory throwing arm that turned the outfield into a danger zone for base runners. Mickey Mantle, his teammate and closest friend, called Maris's arm a howitzer. That is not hyperbole. Mantle watched base runners freeze when they saw Maris field a ball in the deep right field corner. They knew testing his accuracy was a gamble they would lose. Maris had this way of daring runners to test him. His body language invited the challenge. And when runners took that bait and tried to take an extra base, he would throw them out at home from 300 feet away, with a throw so perfect it looked like a laser beam. This created a defensive no-fly zone that protected the Yankees' lead in close games. Runners could not be aggressive. They had to play it safe. And when you take away aggressive base running, you take away one of the fundamental ways teams manufacture runs. Go back to 1954 when Maris was grinding in the minor leagues with the Keokuk Colonels. He tied a single-season record for putouts by an outfielder. His defensive instincts were elite long before he set foot in Yankee Stadium. What this meant for opponents was simple. Even if you got a hit off Maris at the plate, you were not safe when he was in the field. If you tried to stretch a single into a double or tag up on a fly ball, you were risking an out. This all-around talent meant Maris could beat you in multiple ways. He was not one-dimensional. If he did not demoralize your pitcher with a home run, he would demoralize your base runner by gunning them down. The terror was everywhere Maris was on the field. Number 5. The teammate who did not want to face him. Whitey Ford and the demoralizing pull power. Whitey Ford was Roger Maris's teammate, but he was also the Yankees' ace and one of the craftiest pitchers in baseball history. Ford was a winner who knew every trick in the book and was not above inventing new ones. He admitted to scuffing the ball with his wedding ring to get extra movement. He would do whatever it took to win. Ford had seen it all, faced every type of hitter, dealt with every kind of pressure. And yet Ford famously joked that he was glad he did not have to pitch against Roger Maris. This was not just locker room banter. Ford was serious. He had witnessed firsthand what Maris's pull power did to the American League. He saw the demoralizing effect it had on even the best pitchers. Guys who had been dominating for years would face Maris and suddenly question everything. Ford observed that Maris did not just hit home runs. He hit them with a viciousness that broke the spirit of the opposition. What does that mean? When Maris connected, the ball did not just leave the park quietly. It left with authority. A flat trajectory line drive that rattled the right field seats and made everyone feel the impact. The kind of contact that made a pitcher question whether his best stuff was good enough. For Ford, who prided himself on outthinking hitters and setting them up for failure, facing someone who could punish even well-executed pitches was a nightmare he was happy to avoid. The terror was not about physical danger. It was about the psychological toll of knowing that even when you did everything right, even when you hit your spot and executed perfectly, Maris could still beat you. And if your teammate, a guy who sees you throw every day and knows your repertoire inside and out, is openly relieved he does not have to face you, that tells you everything about the level of dominance you bring to the plate. Number 4. The curveball master who could not hide his hook. Camilo Pascual and the sit-and-drive philosophy. Camilo Pascual had one of the best curveballs in baseball history. A pitch that made professional hitters look foolish. The kind of breaking ball that started at the letters and ended in the dirt. A 12-6 hammer that defied physics. For most hitters, the Pascual curveball was an impossible puzzle. You either committed too early and whiffed, or you took it for a strike. But Maris was not most hitters. Pascual found that Maris was one of the few players who could consistently sit on a breaking ball and drive it with power. What does it mean to sit on a pitch? In the physics of hitting, a curveball works because the hitter commits their weight or hands too early. The pitch looks like a strike, so you start your swing and then it breaks out of the zone. By the time you realize what is happening, you have already swung through it. Maris had the discipline to remain uncommitted until the final millisecond. He could see the spin out of the pitcher's hand. He could track the trajectory, and he could wait just long enough to adjust and still drive it with authority. For Pascual, this made every at-bat a high-stress battle. His primary out pitch, the weapon he relied on for strikeouts, was often the very pitch Maris was waiting to punish. Imagine being a pitcher and knowing your best weapon is bait for the hitter. That is terror. You cannot throw your curveball because he is sitting on it. But you cannot just throw fastballs because then you become predictable. Maris turned the chess match of pitching into a losing proposition. For a curveball ace like Pascual, that was demoralizing. Number 3. The tough guy who could not bully the quiet man. Early win and the failure of intimidation. In the 1950s and 60s, pitchers had a tool mostly gone from the modern game, the brushback pitch. It was standard practice and an accepted part of the culture. If a hitter was crowding the plate or getting too comfortable in the batter's box, you threw one up and in, close to the chin, high and tight. The message was brutally simple: back off or get hurt. This was not considered dirty, this was just baseball. Early Win was an absolute legend at this tactic. a tough guy with 300 career wins who never backed down from anyone. He was famous for backing hitters off the plate to reclaim the inside corner as his personal territory. And early Wynn admitted publicly that Roger Maris was exceptionally difficult to intimidate. Maris was born Roger Eugene Maris in Hibbing, Minnesota, and raised in the rugged environment of North Dakota. His background instilled in him a straightforward Midwestern style that translated into an unshakable presence at the plate. Wynn noted that Maris stood his ground regardless of how close the ball came to his chin. He did not flinch. He did not step back. He did not give the pitcher an inch. What made this even more terrifying for pitchers was that Maris combined this stoicism with lightning-fast hands. So if you tried to move him with an inside fastball, thinking you could reclaim the inner half of the plate, you often watched that same ball fly into the right field seats. Maris had the hand speed to turn on inside heat that most hitters could not touch. For early Wynn, a pitcher whose entire philosophy was built on intimidation and control, facing someone who refused to be bullied was a nightmare. The traditional hierarchy of the pitcher-batter duel was upended. You could not scare him. You could not move him. You could only throw your best pitch and hope it was good enough. And more often than not, it was not. Number 2, the Yankee killer who lost his best weapon, Frank Larry and the instant punishment. Frank Larry was the Detroit Tigers ace. He was known as the Yankee Killer for his career dominance over New York. This was a guy who had the Yankees' number. He knew how to pitch to their lineup. He knew their weaknesses. And yet, when it came to Roger Maris, Larry found himself in a situation that terrified him. Larry admitted that Maris had a unique ability to turn a pitcher's best fastball into a home run in an instant. Think about what that means. Your best pitch, the one you have spent years perfecting, the one you rely on when you need a strikeout, Maris could take that pitch and punish it before you even finished your follow-through. This is different from what we talked about with Jim Bunning or Camilo Pascual. Bunning's terror was that Maris would not chase. Pascual's terror was that Maris could sit on the breaking ball. Larry's terror was raw punishment of quality velocity. He could throw a fastball right where he wanted it, paint the corner, hit his spot, and Maris would still turn it around. For a pitcher of Larry's caliber, this was demoralizing. When your best weapon becomes a liability, what do you have left? The answer is nothing. You are out of options. You are hoping for weak contact. You are praying he hits it right at someone, but you are not in control anymore. Maris took that control away the moment he stepped into the box. And for someone like Frank Larry, who built his reputation on beating the Yankees, losing to Maris was not just a statistical loss, it was a psychological defeat. Number 1, the mechanical nightmare that made deception useless. The compact swing and lightning-fast hands. To understand the deepest level of terror Roger Maris brought to the plate, you have to go back to the foundation, the swing itself. Maris did not have the long, sweeping arc of most power hitters. He had a compact, lightning-fast swing that minimized wasted motion. This was described by his contemporaries as a masterpiece of efficiency and vicious intent. What did that compact swing actually do? It allowed Maris to wait longer on a pitch than almost any other hitter in the American League. In baseball, deception is the pitcher's primary weapon. You throw a fastball to set up the changeup. You show the hitter one speed and then take it away. The whole game is built on making the hitter commit too early. But when a hitter can wait longer, that deception becomes useless. Maris could see the pitch longer. He could recognize the spin earlier. And because his swing was so short and fast, he did not need as much time to get the bat through the zone. This created a massive problem for pitchers. Jim Bunning, a Hall of Fame pitcher known for his analytical approach, identified Maris's plate discipline as his most dangerous attribute. Bunning noted that Maris rarely chased bad balls. He forced pitchers to enter the strike zone even when they were ahead in the count. For someone like Bunning, whose success relied on enticing hitters to expand their zone, Maris represented a high-stress battle because he removed the possibility of the easy out. You could not trick him into chasing a pitch in the dirt. You could not get him to swing at a ball outside. You had to throw a strike. And when you threw that strike, you were throwing it to a man who possessed the pull power to turn any mistake into a souvenir. The discipline was not just patience. It was elite visual acuity. Maris had what his batting coach Wally Moses described as keen eyesight and magnificent coordination. He could recognize spin and trajectory earlier than his peers. So when a pitcher realized that Maris could not be baited, the psychological pressure shifted back to the mound. Now the pitcher was the one under stress. Now the pitcher had to execute perfectly or pay the price. And the price was steep. Maris was a husky 200-pound athlete who used a heavy bat and maintained high velocity through the hitting zone. Because of the physics of kinetic energy, where velocity is squared in the equation, his lightning-fast hands contributed exponentially more force to the ball than a slower, more massive swing would have. This is why his hits were described as flat trajectory line drives that rattled the right field seats. It was not just power, it was violent contact, the kind that made pitchers flinch on the mound. The mechanical foundation of Maris's swing created a situation where pitchers felt trapped. If they threw strikes, he could punish them. If they tried to work around him, he would not chase. If they tried to intimidate him, he would not back down. And if they made the mistake of grooving a fastball thinking they could sneak it past him, he would turn on it with those lightning-fast hands and send it into orbit. This was the #1 terror, the foundational problem that every other fear built on. Maris was not guessing, he was hunting, and once he locked onto a pitch, there was nothing a pitcher could do but watch it leave the yard. So what happened when all these pieces came together? What happened when the mechanical nightmare met the pressure cooker of 1961 and the howitzer arm and the refusal to be intimidated? You got a player who fundamentally changed the way opposing managers had to approach every game. You got a hitter who made Hall of Fame pitchers admit they were terrified to face him. You got Roger Maris. The final chapter of the Maris story is important because it shows that the terror was not just about one season. After the Yankees traded him to the St. Louis Cardinals, a move some saw as the end of his career, Maris proved he was the ultimate winner. In St. Louis, he was no longer asked to hit 60 home runs. He was asked to be the complete ball player he had always been, and he delivered. He helped lead the Cardinals to 2 consecutive National League pennants and the 1967 World Series title. During that 1967 series, he hit .385 with 7 runs batted in. Even in the twilight of his career, he was a high-stress threat on the biggest stage. The St. Louis fans appreciated a player with a straightforward Midwestern style, and Maris found a sense of peace there that had been denied him in New York. But for National League pitchers who had not faced him regularly, the terror was brand new. They discovered what the American League had known for a decade. Roger Maris was a player who could take over a game with his bat, his glove, or his sheer presence in the dugout, who was terrifying not just for his statistics, but for his psychological and technical impenetrability. The pitcher's dread was rooted in his refusal to chase bad balls and his ability to punish best fastballs and elite curveballs. The teammates' awe was based on his all-around talent, his howitzer arm, and his vicious pull power. The historian's anxiety was a generational fear that Maris was upending the natural order of the game's records. And the peers' respect was an acknowledgement of his remarkable consistency under a level of media fire that would have broken most athletes. Roger Maris remains perhaps the most misunderstood superstar in the history of Major League Baseball. While the asterisk and the 1961 chase are the headlines of his biography, the true substance of his legacy lies in the terrifying reality facing him on the diamond. He was a player who combined lightning-fast hands with a disciplined eye, a Gold Glove defense with a Midwestern grit that refused to be intimidated by pitchers, fans, or legends. The terror Roger Maris inspired was the terror of the absolute professional, a man who did his job with such efficiency and stoicism that he made the extraordinary look routine. Whether it was Frank Larry losing his best fastball, Camilo Pascual watching his curveball get driven, Early Wynn failing to intimidate him, or Rogers Hornsby losing his grip on the record books, Maris was a force that compelled everyone around him to reach their absolute limit or be demoralized in the attempt. His career spanned 12 seasons and 7 World Series. It is a testament to the fact that while home runs may win games, it is the complete player who defines an era. Roger Maris was that player, truly built different in every sense. And the legends who faced him, the ones who actually had to throw strikes to him or watch him gun down runners from right field, they never forgot the viciousness of the encounter. They never forgot what it felt like to face a hitter who refused to chase, refused to flinch, and refused to be anything less than terrifying. If you enjoyed this deep dive into why Roger Maris was one of the most feared players in baseball history, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment, letting us know which baseball legend you want us to cover next. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.